All right. Well, we are live on YouTube. We are 2 out of 3 of the Jag Bros. I'm Jack, along with my brother JT, and it is the day after the official NFL schedule has been released for the regular season. So we know all 17 of the games for the Jaguars. We're going to be talking about some key games to watch, best case scenario, worst case scenario. Just going to kind of have it be a little bit of a free flowing conversation on the Jags. But JT, what is your initial reaction to the schedule? How are you feeling about the Jag season right now?
Well, I think for starters, a lot of our fans might be disappointed right now that the Sunshine Pumper himself, Joey Raymond, is not on this call as well. He did give us his predictions, so we'll go over that on what he declares as
That's right.
victories and losses and what he thinks our overall schedule
Lots
will
of
be.
wins.
Yes, and I guess I've somehow turned myself into the resident Raymond that's more negative on the Jaguars, which is a really weird feeling to be in. But I don't know if that's just how it's happening this year, or if I've just been disappointed with some of the offseason moves and some of the draft picks and just some of the decision making too in the front office. But look, it's going to be a fun schedule. You're playing a lot of really fun teams that I'm really interested to see the matchups, a lot of high scoring teams for the most part, but it's a tough schedule. It's a lot tougher than it was last year. Even if you're not talking about the specific games, just how the schedule works itself out. The fact that you don't have a bye until after Thanksgiving, that's tough. The fact that you don't, excuse me, that all of your games where you are playing prime time are on the road, that's tough. The fact that you go back to back in London and then go to home to a game against Green Bay, like that's tough. Like there's just really some tough positions. And even when you're looking at when you're catching some of these teams, right? Miami, ton of speed, a ton of smaller guys that are gadgety. You'd almost rather be catching them in December, like we saw them go in the playoffs, where you start to see some of those injuries pile up for them. Catching them early, I mean, boy, Miami looked awesome in September, and so that's a scary matchup. And so there's just I don't love how the schedule sets up for us, but we loved how it set up for us last year, and that didn't work out. So you never can tell in the NFL.
100%. Yeah. And we can just go ahead and just look, especially at these first 4 games. So we're, of course, a couple months out still, but getting ready for the regular season. And right off the jump, this starts really difficult. So we have the first 4 games are away at Miami. Then we go home at Cleveland, at Buffalo, at Houston. And all 4 of those are playoff teams from last year. All 4 of those teams had 10 or more wins. If you just look at their combined record, they each had 10 or 11 wins last season. And I think a ton of this season is going to be determined off of how well we do in those first 4 games. Because every Jags fans know we collapsed last year. We went from 8-3 to 9-8. We go 1-5. And I think as you look at best case, worst case scenario for the Jags, there is a real world where we go 0-4 those first 4 games. And so that is a really, really bad worst case scenario, because you're talking about the last 9 games of Jaguars football being 1-8, and a lot of pressure, a lot of questions. And so even just looking at these first 4 games, what do you think the realistic win-loss record is for the Jags, and what's the goal here? And we
You know,
can look at what Joey's got for the first 4 games too.
I just pulled it up to see what Joey has, because if you're talking about best case and worst case, and what's interesting is Joey's optimism really only has us going 2-2 with losses at Miami and losses at Houston, beating the Browns and then the Bills on the road on Monday Night Football. I think you're spot on the worst case. We could certainly go 0-4 against those teams. And for the team, everyone's like, oh, well, Cleveland's beatable. Yeah, Cleveland may have been beatable, but we threw up on ourselves playing against Cleveland last year down the stretch. And it'll be nice getting them at home. I think we can win that game. I think 1-3 is super realistic. I know we've historically owned the Bills, but the Bills play better on Monday nights. We almost always play poorly in primetime games, and it's in Buffalo. And it just feels like the time the Bills actually will win. I think we actually have a better chance of beating Houston the following week in Houston than we do the Bills. So 1-3. If you're 2-2 out of the gates, I think you're very happy if you're Jacksonville.
I'd agree. I would say that not home opener, but the regular season opener on the road is going to be an interesting game. A couple of these teams are trending down. You know, the Dolphins had to move away from a lot of pieces. Bills did as well. But it makes me nervous the Jags on prime time. So some people were hoping for 4 or 5 games for Jags on prime time. Well, we only got 2, and they're both on the road. Both are going to be tough games as well. So I agree. 2-2 is the goal. Of course, 4-0 is the goal, but 2-2 would feel good after week 4 because you go into some much more winnable games there in the middle of the season.
Jacksonville has to be a team that everybody just loves, that draws a huge market, that Trevor Lawrence transcends the fact that we're a small market and the people just want to cheer for him. And to date, we haven't done that. And we technically do have 4 primetime games or standalone games with the 2 ones in London. So I kind of get what the schedulers have done. And we had both of our games at home last year in primetime that we didn't show up for at least one of them. So I get it. But here's the other challenge with those first 4 games. All 4 of those, as you mentioned, are playoff teams. All 4 of those are likely to be competing for the playoffs again this year. So you really don't want to go 1-3 or 0-4 if you can, because then you're losing a lot of ground. And I know Joey would say, well, Buffalo Bills are trending horribly down. They have no receivers. They've had to lose a lot of people. That's true. But Josh Allen still has been significantly better than Trevor on a more consistent basis. And we just saw Patrick Mahomes win the whole Super Bowl throwing to essentially just Kelsey. And so what the Bills have, like, may not necessarily scare you a ton on paper, but like they're still a very, very talented team. They're coached well. I like Joe Brady as an offensive coordinator a lot. And you saw a remarkable difference between the Buffalo Bills offense in the first half of the season versus when he took over in the second half of the season. So I don't think Buffalo takes this massive drop down to bottom 5, bottom 10 offense. More likely they're kind of that 5 to 10 range.
It's a good point. Yeah. And for any watching live or people watching later, let us know, what do you think the Jags do in the first 4 games? I think it's going to be a super important way to either start the season or to struggle to start the season. And I think when you talk about Josh Allen, you talk about some of these other guys we're going to play. Yes, Tua tailed off, but Tua still led the league in passing yards last year. You also have CJ Stroud, Mr. Potential superstar quarterback already at 22 years old. And so the Jaguars secondary, a lot of new pieces there are going to be put to the test early. So you'll see Ronald Darby most likely out there. You'll see a guy like Jerry Jones get more playing time. You'll see Antonio Johnson potentially break his way into the starting lineup as well. And then Savage, another free agent. So you would like to play some of these guys later because week 1, you're going up against an explosive passing offense. And so, again, let us know what y'all think. First 4 games going to be some tough ones.
And if you're going to try to play a lot of press man coverage, which supposedly we are, maybe we don't do it against Miami because they have some of the fastest guys with Waddle and Hill and pretty much everybody that Mike McDaniel wants to get on his team has elite speed, not just good speed, but elite speed. So that just feels like a terrible matchup for us. So let's shift to October. We're looking at
this is where it gets better.
It's absolutely going to get better. You got the Colts at home. You then are going to London for the Bears and the Patriots, followed by another home game with the Packers on October 27th. How do we do, Jack?
Yeah, you got to go at least 3-1 here. I think the London games, Jaguars have typically done well in London. Shout out to our UK Jags fans. We just went 2-0. We turned the season around last year in London, and you're going to go up against 2 rookie quarterbacks. So I don't like, yes, the Bears are going to be significantly better. than they were last year. They're going to be a fun offense to watch. You got Caleb Williams, you got a Dunze. They go get Keenan Allen, but I don't like a young quarterback going overseas, playing practice. A lot of the Jaguars guys have done this 4 or 5 years. This is Trevor Lawrence's 4th or 5th year. A lot, ETN, all these guys have played a bunch in London. So I love that advantage for us. I think we go 2-0 in London. I think you got to win home divisional games, especially against the Colts. The Packers are going to be a very tough team. And that's where, it'd be amazing to get a 4-game win streak here, but that's going to be a very tough game week 8 against the Packers.
Yeah, so your 3-1 has us beating the Colts at home, the 2 London games,
Correct.
and losing to the Packers. I would echo that. It's just a bad spot to be over in London for that long, to come back to Jacksonville, to be taking on a very good Packers team. That feels like it's challenging, but we saw this on a short week coming back and going to play New Orleans last year, and we ended up winning that game. And that was at New Orleans, and that was a game that I think everybody circled as Jacksonville would lose. Turns out we lost everybody else down the stretch, but we did end up pulling that one off. So you can never tell how the NFL season works out, but I think you have to have a really good October if you start off a little slow.
Yeah, momentum's a powerful thing. So you never know, if you go 3 wins in a row, you come home, all of a sudden there's a lot more conversation, especially if you go 2-2 in those first 4 games and you're sitting there at 5-2. We know this from last year, starting off so hot. Maybe you're in these conversations again. Are we towards the top of power rankings, towards the top of the division, and maybe even the conference, where hopefully this time we can use it more to our advantage of saying, hey, we can be a contender? Because if you're going to be a contender, you need to win home games, even against tough teams like the Packers.
Yes. And so now let's look at November. We have 3 games, then the bye. I think the one thing that most Jag fans are frustrated by is that November 17th at the Lions is on a Sunday. There's a lot of rumors and a lot of smoke that we're going to end up getting to play our first ever Thanksgiving game. Unfortunately, that is not the case. We're going to be playing
1 week off.
Yep, 1 week off. And so that Jag players might enjoy the fact that they have Thanksgiving off. But it is unfortunate that we will not be playing on that day. And this is a tricky spot too, with a lot of 4 NFC teams in a row. If you look the week before with the Packers, you go the Eagles, which is unfortunate that we have that as our 17th game. You would love to have picked up the the Panthers or somebody as your 17th game. But I get from a scheduling perspective why they may do that. It makes for a lot of drama with Doug Peterson going back to Philadelphia. I think for the first time since he's been fired. So that'll be interesting to see a lot of media around that conversation. The Vikings, who are going to look very different as well. The second week, and then Detroit. So those 3 games in the first week of December, we'll play the Texans. So that the next 4 is at the Eagles on Sunday night, the Vikings at home, at Detroit, and the Texans at home.
And just want to give a quick shout out. I was just pulling up our live as well. So we did have someone's already following along, giving us some feedback, and so Ewan, I believe I'm saying that right. I hope. Thanks for jumping on. He's got us at 11-6 and with a 3-1 start, with only losing to the Dolphins. So if we started that well, that would be a huge win for the Jaguars. But yeah, so looking at these next 4 games, this is where the season gets tough again. So it kind of feels like tough, very winnable game stretch, and then very tough, where again, if you're talking about best case, worst case scenario, the division that we're going up against is the NFC North, one of the better divisions in all of NFL. And these are going to be hard games. At Detroit is a scary game. At Philadelphia Sunday Night Football. Again, we have not performed very well on prime time. It's gonna be fun. I got hyped for every single Jags primetime game last year. I think I probably predicted them to win every one of them. And I don't think we won a single one other than London. Again, it depends on how you count those. But that's going to be tough. And home against the Vikings feels like one you're going to need to win. They're most likely going to be starting a rookie quarterback, I would guess, JJ McCarthy by this point. I'm not even sure. I know they picked up a veteran as well. I'm blanking on who else they have in Minnesota,
Sam
but
Darnold.
you're going to have
Sam Darnold.
The Sam Darnold, yeah.
But you have two of the best young wide receivers out there, with Jefferson and
Addison.
Jordan Addison. And you also will have Hawkinson back by then point. So you've got a ton of weapons around those young guys. And Minnesota's defense played better than expected last year.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. So it's not going to be an easy one. If I'm guessing, I mean, this is just kind of predicting, I'm guessing it's going to be about a field goal predicted win. And so I think most people are going to call that being close. And then you're going to have a very tough game after the bye. We all know the Jaguars collapse after the bye last year. We were like, oh, like this is going to be great. We're in a great spot. We get a big showdown matchup against the 49ers and we get blown to smithereens. I think it was like 30 something to 3. Offense, defense, special teams was terrible. All that to say, it could be another game where you're looking at going into the bye where best case scenario, you're right there. I think everyone's saying the Texans are, of course, going to be the team to be in the AFC South compared to the Jaguars. Some Jags fans are, of course, going to say we're the team to beat. So that could be a game where you're circling, starring, saying this could have a huge implication in the AFC South division race. So if you're going to win the division, you've got to go 2-2 in this stretch, at least.
I think that's well said, Jack. 2-2 needs to happen, and one of those wins needs to be the Texans. You have to find a way to split the Texans at minimum, which we've historically struggled. And then the other thing that's scary at Detroit, I think, is most Jag fans remember on our run 2 years ago, where we're rattling off win after win after win. We then go run into a steamroller against a much weaker Detroit Lions team than they are today and lose like 41-14. And so that's a game that you want to see us compete in at least and find a way to win. I think the Eagles one is almost certainly going to be a loss. Whereas I think, let's look at Joey. Joey might have us winning like 3-1.
Joey said that was his bold prediction. He said they're gonna be fired up for Doug's revenge game. I don't know. You'd have to have a different Jaguars team than we had last year, because it felt like every game you're like, oh, they're going to come out fired up. They came out so flat. Yeah. And so, maybe there's a different tune, different tone, different culture, but that feels like an almost impossible. On the road, Eagles have the last couple of years been just world beaters, especially in the regular season. So they only lose 2, 3, 4 games a year. So Joey's got us winning. I think both of us would say that is going to be perhaps one of, if not the toughest. In fact, I think that one and at Detroit will be 2 of our toughest. But let's look at the last 5 games, December, and then the first week of January. And then we'll kind of give some final thoughts again on the schedule. So week 14, we go at Tennessee. So this is where it gets a little bit lighter again. At Tennessee, home against the Jets, at Oakland, home against Tennessee, and then on the road against Indianapolis, week 18 to close the season. What do you think these final 5 games, where do you see the Jaguars being, where are games that you're circling or need to be wins, JT?
Look, it depends on how you value the Jets, but realistically, there is a scenario where Jacksonville goes 5-0 or maybe even 6-0 after the bye if they can beat the Texans. Like that, the schedule is set up that way to make a little bit of a run. The Titans are going to be beatable. You've already, I think we've seen Anthony Richardson have trouble with injuries both in college, high school, and now in the pros. The chance of him being the starter in January of next year seems unlikely. And so you look at the Jets, and the Jets right now are a dark horse AFC champion. They made a lot of moves. We talked about in our last episode the Texans going all in with some of their strategic moves. The Jets are truly going all in. If you had a top
Yep.
five level defense and then you go get Mike Williams, you go have Aaron Rodgers coming back, you have all these guys. If they stay healthy or somewhat healthy, there's a chance that they truly are a top three AFC team. So I think 4-1, I think a Jag fan would be happy with that. You could certainly go 2-3 or 3-2 with this schedule too.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting that we won't play Tennessee till week 14. That's going to be a long time to watch. And I think most would say at this point that the Titans, at least going into the season, are towards the bottom. But this is what makes NFL fun. You never know. Like last season, we were saying, oh, the Texans are going to be a few years away. They've got a rookie quarterback. Their best player on defense, Will Anderson, he's a rookie. And of course, they end up winning the division, getting 10 wins. And so you never know for a team like Tennessee. You're going to know, though, by week 14 if they're legit or not. But this is where you need to pile up wins. 3-2 is the bare minimum. 4-1, as you said, I think is the goal. 5-0, I have a hard time just believing that this team can string together 5 or 6 wins in a row. I know we did have a 5-game win streak last year, but that feels tough. And I know we did 2 years ago where, maybe that's the case where we get on fire at the end of the season and get some momentum into the playoffs. But this schedule is going to be tough. There's no question about it. Just as you said at the beginning, there's a lot of things. You don't have a ton of games where you're like, that feels like an easy win. And that can be scary for a team where the identity is still in question. We don't know, is this team the team that went 8-3, or is this the team that finished out 1-5? I know there's new players. How much better are they going to improve the team? So it's going to be interesting.
What's fascinating too, and I'm just now like kind of doing a deeper dive look at the Texans schedule too. The contrast between what they have versus what we have is so interesting because they start with the Colts, then the Bears, then the Vikings, then us, then the Bills at home, the Patriots, the Packers, and the Colts. There's a very real scenario where they are 6-2, potentially even 7-1 coming out of the gates here with that, a lot of winnable games and a lot more of their winnable games. But then you turn the month to November and December, they have the Jets, the Lions, the Cowboys, the Titans, which is what we know, the Jaguars. Then you have the Dolphins, the Chiefs, the Ravens, and then the Titans again. So their schedule is very backloaded with the amount of talent that they're going to be playing against. So there's a very, very real situation where Jacksonville's going to be trailing in the year for potentially part of it, if not the entire year, the Texans. And so I don't know, maybe that keeps us hungrier. Maybe that's not. I personally would have rather start out a little bit hotter and being able to stack wins. I feel like that would give a young team that has lacked confidence some momentum. And yeah, I don't really want to give that to the Texans, who could just be surging in the first month or two. So that kind of scares me.
Yeah, it feels like the only kind of Jags argument for us surpassing the Texans this year is a lot of people just kind of hoping and banking on a sophomore slump for CJ Stroud. And maybe it happens, but that's a risky thing. You'd rather be saying, hey, I think we've got the talent to surpass them, other than I hope they take a step backwards. But Ewan said again, just shout out to him following along with us. He says a lot of it's going to depend and hinge on the offensive line. That is 100% true. Our O-line struggled very much. Trevor was always getting rid of the ball. Trevor had 4 injuries this past season. The running game came to a halt at the end of the year where we just could not run the ball. We became one-dimensional. And so we did bring in a new center, but a lot of the O-line is just going to bank on that we're healthy. Javon Foster is going to be, a depth, a role player, but I don't see him in the starting lineup at all in this season. So a lot of it's going to be the same offensive line with Mitch Morse at center, and you're just hoping that upgrade and that people stay healthy, because that's going to be a key for the Jags.
Yeah, I mean, we've already outlined the fact that neither one of us feel like you are going all in with some of the moves. Some of the stuff that you did in the draft is guys with super high upsides, but have yellow flags and are a little bit more of a project. There are a lot of freak athletes, but from a production standpoint, have been either inconsistent or less than what you would hope for from a college perspective. So that'll be interesting to see how some of that plays out as the season continues to unfold. And if I do the math correctly, I think that has us at somewhere between Jack, you and I, if we go 2-2, 3-1, 2-2, and then 5-1, or excuse me, 4-1 or 3-1, that's got to, or 3-2, that's got us somewhere around that 10 or 11 wins. So when we're saying, look, we are like I'm potentially being labeled as the negative Jag bro here on Twitter, like yeah, but I still have us going 10 or 11 wins compared to Joey, who Joey has us going 12-5, where we lose the Colts game because we're resting our starters and have
On
already
purpose. We're good to
yeah,
go.
purposely. Yeah, we've already locked in our seeded position in the AFC. So a 12-5, which could be 13-4. I don't see 13 wins on the schedule with this roster.
Yeah, so let's do this as we kind of wrap up. So let us know too. We always love to interact. We'll throw this on Twitter as well. If you don't follow us there yet, make sure you do at the Jag Bros. And we'll post some more stuff here on YouTube. And then, of course, we'll be back all together later in the summer as more NFL stuff happens. But let's close with this, JT. I'll toss it to you first, then I'll go. But we also want to hear from y'all. So what would you say best case scenario record is? What is your prediction? And then would you say worst case prediction for the Jaguars in this season?
So I just struggle to put us over like a 12-13 mark for best case scenario. I think it's just a tough schedule. So I'll say 11 wins, 12 wins seems like the ceiling. I think most likely we are in that 10 or 11 range. I think we were able to hit our top, but I think there's a very real possibility the wheels could come off, especially if Press Taylor and Trevor are not on the same page, which we saw and heard rumors of toward the end of last year. If Doug and Trent aren't on the same page, which we've seen, like there's a very real scenario where you start out 2-6 or something like that, and then you're really questioning Trevor's leadership. Is he the right guy? Should we be giving him this huge payday, or should we blow it all up? Like you could be having a completely different conversation if all of a sudden you lose the Bears in London after you went 2-4 in the first 4 or 5 games.
Yeah. So what's that number for the bottom for you?
Look, I mean, we've seen some low lows in Jacksonville, and this team is too talented, I think, to hit some of those lows. But like, I think there's only 5 or 6 games that I like feel like, oh yeah, that's definitely going to be a win. So I think you could, and we could obviously lose one of those games. So yeah, 6 or 7 wins. We're not going to be the worst team in the league, but unless we completely like purposely tank. But I could see a 6 or 7 win team.
Yeah. See, I agree. I think and this what's going to be interesting and crazy. I think the gap is going to be big from where the floor is and where the ceiling is for the Jaguars. I could easily see a world with this tough of a schedule. As you said, we just start off slow and bad and we just never gain any momentum. Because typically the last couple of years we've been a either first half or second half of the season team. But what if we start really bad and it just feels like, hey, we've put now together 10, 11, 12, 13 football games in a row if you look back to last season. So I think the ceiling is as low as a 5-win season. Like, and you look at what Balky did, a lot of his moves are more high risk, high reward. I'm high on Brian Thomas Jr., but if there's a lot of risk there. So if he comes and he's not able to perform, all of a sudden you're looking at a receiver room of Christian Kirk, who is good, but he's not a home run guy, and Gabe Davis, who was decent at Buffalo, but was never more than 700, 800 yards and a few touchdowns. And if you have any injuries, if the O-line struggles. So I think that is the low end. The high end is you come in, you made some risky picks, and you could easily go. And if you are able to turn the culture around and say, hey, we win big games, you could be 13 wins. So that is a massive gap. So I think you could go as bad as 5 wins, as high as 13. I don't see any way that we get higher or lower than those. But my prediction, my head says, unfortunately, I think this is another 9-8 season. Like that's just where it looks like it could easily trend. But I'm going to go with my heart and say we get 10 wins, get back to the playoffs. I don't know if we're able to pass the Texans. I do think they'll have more struggles than last year, but also take some steps forward. So I think we make the playoffs probably as a wild card team with 10 wins next year.
And final thought here too. I've been a Jaguar fan consistently watching just about all the games for 25 years. I've seen a lot of Jaguar. I cannot remember a single season, even our 14-2 season back in 1999, where we beat the Colts twice and the Titans twice. I think it has happened, but I can't think of a time. So anybody who's saying, oh, well, those are just 4 easy wins, it's never been 4 easy wins for us. It's hard winning divisional games, period. It's really hard for the Jaguars. The amount of times we've had 8-game losing streak, a 9-game losing streak, a 7-game losing streak against these teams year over year over year is high. So if we're penciling in a 1-1 with the Texans and 4-0 against the other people,
which we've really struggled against the Texans, I mean, pointed out earlier.
Yeah, we'll go look that up, but I'm pretty sure we've never beaten the Titans twice and the Colts twice in a single year.
Yeah. So, well, that's our just kind of walk through the schedule, some key games, some matchups, and then final predictions. Again, love to hear from y'all. Let us know what you're thinking, how you're feeling. I know JT has had the reputation this offseason, but I also know we're probably only a couple months away from JT predicting a Jaguars Super Bowl run as well. So we'll see when that happens. But make sure you tune in to the Jag Bros here on YouTube and then, of course, on our podcast as well.